with a quick introduction, my name is Hubert Zaitchik, and I run and have started the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs group here in Dallas. Quite a few years ago, we're a group of mostly physicians who have interests in entrepreneurial endeavors, and there's no dues to pay at the local level. There is a national organization, and you would find it under sopenet.org, and you can join the National Organization of Society of Physician Entrepreneurs there, and then they will send you to your respective chapter. We are one of those chapters and are in DFW. That said, anyone is welcome to attend our events. And while I'll always encourage you to be a dues-paying member, we don't police that here, just so you know. So our focus here is mostly on topics that would be of interest to physicians who have entrepreneurial aspirations, ideas, already in the middle of it, might join one, any and all of those, and bringing in speakers that are relevant to that. We've had a variety of speakers over the year. Harvey Castro was one of them. He's an AI and generative AI in healthcare leader and speaker. We've had Paul Hirschman here, who runs a company that lends itself to be plugged into dermatology offices and others, with a kind of an add-on feature on with the laser treatment. And today we have Lyndsey Harper here from Rosie. So I've known Lyndsey for a long time. I've managed to misspell your name every single time, I think, because there's two Y's in her name. This is so difficult for non-US born, non-native speakers that I've managed to add an A instead of an E instead of your Y on occasion. The good news is that it doesn't matter as long as we're just talking.
That's right. It's difficult for US born people too, Herbert. I just have a weirdly spelled name, so don't worry about it. I'm used to it.
Two Y's with Lyndsey. And then, of course, my co-worker here at Health Blockaders, Lyndsey Settles, is also completely spelled differently. So in any case, Lyndsey, I think you stopped practicing.
Right? I still practice as a laborist.
Okay, so
yes.
Okay. Is a practicing OB-GYN, and she will obviously tell you the story of Rosie here in a minute. But what's important to know is, and something I always want to let everyone know that hasn't met Lyndsey yet, is that she has, from the beginning, when she started her endeavors, made herself available to others and helped others. So the paying it forward mentality isn't something that she came upon at some point later. She was from the beginning involved in the health innovation community here in Dallas, open to learning and helping others, and has been a spokesperson just for that alone, yet alone women and the things she'll discuss in a second, her company in Dallas and beyond. So she also has an entrepreneurial husband. So heaven knows what your children are gonna do. I mean, it's like two entrepreneurs with degrees. It's like unbelievable. Expectations are super high. But that's just a quick snapshot that doesn't run you through all the accolades and degrees she has. But Lyndsey. So Lyndsey, I'll just give you a chance to rebut anything anything I said that
pretty good.
Might be wrong or inaccurate or nope.
No, I appreciate the kind words, Hubert, and I have learned so much from this community, including you and all that you've built at Health Wildcatters, and appreciate your support along the way through today. And I'm excited to be here, definitely, for this conversation.
Excellent. And what just to add a piece that nobody knew, Lyndsey, we have talked about this a second ago. Nobody knew that Lyndsey and I stepped into a ring with boxing gloves
Once upon a time.
once upon a time.
Yeah.
So as opponents, it was a symbolic gesture. We were in some sort of a, what's it called, digital fight club. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
we were I don't know, somehow coerced into doing this thing. It was difficult for us to come up with differing opinions, but in any case, we played along. It was kind of fun, and
Yeah.
that's why we own boxing gloves now. Because I thought we'd have to have the prop. It was on Zoom. It was a pandemic. Usually it happens in an actual ring, and it's kind of fun. Lots of hecklers, but thank you, Lyndsey, for being here, and for those of you who have joined us. We are recording this session, and we'll put it online later. Lyndsey Harper has started an organization called, well, it's called I always know it as Rosie, but it's Rosie
Yeah. The technical, like the technical name is Rosie Wellness, but
Wellness.
we shorten it to Rosie all the time. Yeah.
So as we would like to do here is to really kind of dive into a little bit of the story of how you
Yeah.
got started with that, what brought you to starting the company, and then the big jump to actually doing it, because obviously it was born out of a need that you observed in your practice. But if you could just get us started with that piece and how Rosie Wellness got started.
Sure, of course, yeah. So I think it's important to know and to share that I did not think I was an entrepreneur growing up. I always wanted to be a doctor. I still love the practice of medicine, and it's very near and dear to my heart. And so I went through a very traditional path, undergrad, then straight to medical school, and then to residency here in Dallas. I'm originally from Arkansas, but I came to Dallas for my residency. And then I joined a private practice right out of residency, and, just did the usual things. Had a few kids and started to just kind of, observe in my patient population where my gaps were. I had been really trained, I feel like, very well in, obstetrics and in most areas of gynecology, particularly in surgery. But something that kept coming up in my office really on a daily basis, and this is when I was like 7 to 8 years in practice that I started to put these things together. My patients were really struggling with a lot of sexual health complaints. The first and most prominent, and this is borne out in the data as well, is low sexual desire. And then also a lot of trouble with orgasm, with arousal, with pain. But I had had zero training. I had no idea what to tell these women. And I felt it left me feeling incompetent, like I needed to do something more or better or different. And so I started reflecting on a lot of things. I started asking a lot of questions. I don't know if any of y'all are in these Facebook groups of physicians, but they're quite powerful. I asked around in a couple of those, hey, what is everyone doing for low desire? And I got back like some really charged messages about like, oh my gosh, if anyone else complains about low desire again, I'm going to scream, or I don't have a magic pill for this. When will people understand? And I was like, wow, okay, this isn't just my problem. This is clearly like a bigger problem. And then I started looking at the data, and I learned that 43% of women have a sexual health concern. So that's nearly half of the women that I was taking care of have a sexual health problem. And I had received zero training. Like I had no idea what to do. And then I thought about it further, and I was like, oh man, remember in medical school, in my like clinical rotations, I spent 2 weeks at the erectile dysfunction clinic at the VA, like a government sponsored clinic for sexual dysfunction in men. And I wasn't even going into, urology or anything. Like that was just part of my basic clinical rotations at the VA. And I'm like, wow, like this is remarkable that I had so much more training in terms of minutes or hours or days in men's sexual health. And I had zero in women. And in gynecology, we learned, a bit about what we now call GSM, like genitourinary symptoms or syndrome of menopause, and vaginal dryness and things like that after menopause. But other than that, like that's pretty much the end of the conversation. And so I really didn't even have a framework from which to work to classify these problems, to sort of start down, in a sort of algorithmic way, like we might. How do I build a differential? Like I didn't have any of these answers. And so then my next step was to ask, like, where does one go to learn about this? I joined ISWISH, which is the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, became a fellow of that organization. and then landed at this place. I received much more training and became very passionate about this and really quite angry actually, and thought, this was in 2018 at the time. Do I, open a sexual medicine sort of practice for women in Dallas, which I still think is probably a pretty good idea for someone. And there are a couple people doing more of that work now. Or is there an opportunity, since I know this is a global problem, like a frustration for OBGYNs that we perceive as sort of a time suck and Pandora's box, and a huge problem for women, 43% of women. I mean, like, that's remarkable. Is there an opportunity to do something at scale? And Hubert mentioned that I have an entrepreneur husband, and I really just blame him for this whole thing because he, started talking to me very early on in our relationship. We're about to celebrate our 16th wedding anniversary. There are problems that you are positioned to uniquely solve. And you is, means many different things. You as a woman, you as a physician, you as a communicator, you as a mother, that can mean so many different things. And so be on the lookout for what those problems are. And they show up. And I know I'm speaking to a group of physician entrepreneurs, so I'm preaching to the crowd, but they show up in our everyday lives all the time. And where is your role in solving those problems? And so the more I was putting all of these puzzle pieces together, I realized that this was my problem to solve, because I wasn't convinced at the time, and still am not, that anyone else was going to take it on. And there's many reasons for that, which I'm happy to get into, and I've encountered firsthand now that I'm doing the work. But it does take a specific person, and I think a physician is uniquely positioned to solve these problems with so much credibility, to really take this work on. And I decided that I was mad enough about it, and that not only was I passionate enough about it, but I felt almost obligated to do it. Because if I didn't do it sort of in my position of privilege, truly, from so many aspects, how could I expect that anyone else would take it on? And so that really is what kind of pushed me over the edge, to start Rosie. And I founded the company in 2018, and we launched in 2019.
So that's, obviously a not that atypical founder story. You saw a problem firsthand. You started looking around. You started asking around. You in your case though knew that the problem was real. There was no solution because you were on a daily basis pestered with it and felt powerless, and eventually couldn't find the solution elsewhere. So you decided to create it yourself. And Scott, as you said, great fallback, by the way, if something doesn't work out. Well, it was all Scott's idea.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is I was having such a hard time with the decision, because I joined the practice literally of my dreams. My partners to this day are still like my best friends. I had a, practice of pregnant patients. Like, to leave was like for any of us, it would be such a big deal. And it was such a big deal for me. And I just was like, what should I do? And he was like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. At the end of the day, this has to be your decision. We can't look back and have any other sort of remembrance of how this decision was made, other than you were that convicted around it. So he abdicated himself from all responsibility very early on in the process. Don't worry.
There goes that idea. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I mean, so that that's good, and very often, especially in healthcare, and that's why we like to see a physician or healthcare professional involved in the startups that we back, is very often the observed or perceived problem we get presented by, let's say, applicant startups, is not really that solid. It's like, it's your experience. And don't get me wrong, if a patient can also be a powerful entrepreneur that changes things and changes lives, and whether it's in a movement or a startup or however, having observed something and being a capable person, even without a healthcare background, can lead and has led to many innovations. But very often also, it is not a healthcare professional who did not really like check on the original problem to see if it is a really widespread problem. That's not so uncommon, and even with physicians. So credit to you for running the traps and checking with others. See plenty of startups that are started by physicians who had a problem, created a solution, works like a charm for them, maybe even for the whole office. Everyone loves it. It's some sort of a scheduling thing or a automation, and it's just wonderful. And it's and they, but because they know it all and their partners are cheering them on, it just gets done. And then because it works in that practice, they assume this is the solution for the rest of the world.
Mhm.
I've seen countless of such, and this is often a tragedy because it does work for the practice, it does work and solve problems for them, but it's not scalable because it requires these other physicians to literally crawl into your head and have the exact same pathway of solving this problem. So granted, it's not what you're attacking, but especially workflowish software,
Mhm.
any kind of automations, that is not a slam dunk, and uh, that's very difficult often to really resolve. So in your case, you really saw a problem, you were able to verify it with others. You saw it so often that you knew it was real, and then you did the thing that most people don't do, and that is, well, I'm going to do something about it myself, because that's a big step from practicing medicine, and it creates all sorts of uncertainty and exposes you to be the rookie in the room with regards to fundraising and corporate structures and all the things that you know how to learn. Um, Obviously, fast forward, you solved all those, but can you
Well,
talk
I'm
a little
still
bit about,
learning. Don't
yeah,
worry.
well, okay. Can you talk a little bit about that next step? I mean, again, I'm not shy on my opinions on this subject, and uh, you know, if I'm offending anyone, I went to med school as well, so if anything, I'm offending all of us. But there is a fairly high likelihood that our peers are gonna be fairly convinced that they're fairly smart people, and therefore this test of intelligence in starting the startup is now coming up, and they are used to end up on the top at the top of their class. And so now they attack this thing, this entrepreneurship startup thing, and somehow assume that because of their intellectual abilities, this intelligence test is obviously going to be successful. So they are uh, not open to a ton of input very often, and that's a really, really unique thing because you have very smart people who are not willing to take the advice and make themselves vulnerable, basically, to not knowing
Mm.
everything and taking advice from others. So how did you, I mean, you had Scott, so I'll give you that. He's
Yeah,
an entrepreneur and you're a dynamic duo and all that, but still, I mean, you had to figure that stuff out, and it wasn't in a field where he was
totally.
doing stuff prior.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it might be as much of a personality situation as anything. Like I know that I am a competent, relatable, good physician, but I had no belief necessarily that I was going to be a competent, good, relatable entrepreneur. Like I just came into this being day one resident and like, getting ready for the fire hose again. And that's kind of how I have approached it and still approach it to this day. Like I think that's what makes being an entrepreneur fun is you never have it mastered. Like as soon as you get to the next level, it's time to level up again and it's time to level up again and it's never over. And I think that that's the cure to burnout, truly, is curiosity, open mindedness, thinking of other ways to do things, asking for other people's perceptions of the work you're doing as a team or from an outsider. Like, I love to learn from our users. And so I think if we truly tie ourselves to this idea of intellectual curiosity, and that's the reason why we're entrepreneurs, then we just have to really cut ties with all of this I already know idea. Like, yes, I do know women's health. I still have more to learn about women's health. There's more data coming out every single day. So I wouldn't even say that I'm necessarily a master of that, because who can be a master really of anything when everything is always changing, and that's just science and business in general. And so I think whenever you just kind of shift your mindset around it, I don't ever want to be the one who knows the most about anything really, because then what else is there to do for me personally in terms of professional or personal growth? And so I think that's just, one aspect of this that I think was more difficult for me than that was to start to ask for help. I want to know, and I'm very curious. I used to view, particularly I think from as a leftover of training, asking for help or communicating that I didn't know what the right next step was, or that I didn't know everything. That part was hard for me. And so I had to really work on, working that muscle. And that's gotten really easy for me now because I realized how many people want to help. So many people want to help. They want to see you succeed. They have the knowledge that you don't because you were taking care of patients while they were learning this thing. And so they want to be able to translate that to your work. And so once I unlocked that, which took me probably a good year to do, and it wasn't that I was realizing I should ask for help, but too scared to do it. It just wasn't in me. It wasn't part of my sort of, operating system to think, oh, I'm stuck. Let me ask for help. It was, oh, I'm stuck. Let me dig in further and like perseverate and just really find all the resources and try to read everything I could read. And that's not efficient in when you're building a company. So that was a major, major unlock for me. And it's probably along the same lines. But I do value the curiosity and the continued learning that entrepreneurship brings. And it's something that I think keeps me really engaged at all times in the business, which is a little bit different, I would say, than practice. Practice can get pretty routine, and there's a lot of negative things happening right now, unfortunately, in patient care. And so that can be rough. And I think that this is sort of the antidote to that.
Yeah. So asking for help is, it's a something you have to do a lot of in entrepreneurship. By the way, I also wanted to mention, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I know a few of you joined after we were done with our intros. Feel free to put it in the chat. I have that window open now, and I'll keep monitoring it for any of your questions, and be happy to have you guys just open up your camera and ask it yourself. But if you don't want to, I can ask Lyndsey as well. We're on pretty good terms, so I'll
I
ask you.
think, yeah. So we've repaired our relationship since our Fight Club
Since the Fight Club,
night.
yeah. So that's a unique thing for physicians. I do think that there is a disproportional amount of, well, let me put it this way. I think there is pretty much every physician has an invention. Every physician has come up with some improvement of some kind, and whether they ended up doing it or not, and whether they ended up acting on that or just helping somebody else do it. I know the group itself sees the human suffering and wants to create solutions when they don't have their own. Obviously, drug reps and medical device reps very often are the beneficiaries of that. They'll be in the surgical suite and ask questions, and then the physician may say, "Man, if this only had a handle here, if it had this," and lo and behold, a year later, the product comes out and has that feature. So that's a very, very common way to innovate, and really physicians like that because now they have the tool that they thought was needed. And sometimes they step out and do it themselves, which turns out to be a whole lot more complicated than just what these big device companies can do, because they've got massive teams that can just be put on the job and execute on that. Now, stepping just a slight bit away from the physician piece, when all that's said and done with the positives and maybe also the negatives of having that background, the mechanics of starting a startup are still the same, and you will need to spin up a company, develop a solution, decide what regulatory pathway it goes through, decide what your liabilities are, raise funds, and all those things. Maybe talk a little bit about these more mundane parts, and which is really, I think, the aspect of entrepreneurship for a physician that is not at all any different, except all of a sudden we have to do the things that in our practice, we might have people to do for us, and there's no
Right.
substitute here. Obviously, you can get help, but as an entrepreneur and as a CEO and founder, you're expected to show up, you're expected to make decisions and come up with the solutions, and that is not any different for you. So what maybe are there any specific things that you thought were going to be easier or harder, or what's most remarkable to you? This is an area where you had no personal experience in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of like mystique around being a founder and starting a company because there's, in OBGYN, we always had our red book. There's no red book to like look up on page 240, like how to create a model, or you know what I mean? Like there's not like a playbook. And there's also not like a first this, then this, then this, then this. It's kind of all mixed up depending upon what exactly you're doing. And by nature, it's not been done before. Like that's the whole point, right? And so you do have to, for me, there was a bit of a transition between I don't know anything, I am sort of open to everything, and transitioning that from that frame of mind to like I now can trust my intuition. I feel and believe that I have good sort of strategic, paths in internal to me, and sort of building that muscle where you start to trust yourself and the decisions that you're making within the business. And that is a process, and it's really just about putting one foot in front of the other. And I think that, there's many strengths that we as physicians hold. Clearly, we are intellectually competent, right? So I don't think that I do have a mindset of like, well, if, whatever other number, thousands and thousands of MBA people can learn this stuff, surely I can figure it out too. I do have a certain level of confidence regarding my ability to just figure something out. But, when it comes down to it, there are certain things that sort of are gut checks or catch you by surprise. I mean, for me, launching a technology platform without having any engineering or software background was really a wild ride. Like I remember sitting in the first few meetings and I'm like, I don't even know what these people are saying or talking about, or the frameworks from which they are making these decisions. It would be a non-clinical person sitting in on, like a grand rounds, or a, like, you're doing like, rounds on the ward together. Like it would be something like that. And you're like, well, they're building my thing, but I don't even know what they're talking about. And so you really have to start to ask a lot of questions, get as involved as possible, like read all the books, and just pretend like it's residency. That's basically just what I did. It's pretend like it's residency, and I've just got a ton to learn. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I think that the more mundane things, I hate reviewing contracts. I hate creating models. I hate all this stuff, but I love certain aspects about it. I love storytelling. I love bringing things from concept into reality. And that can be both within the product, that can be in a pitch deck. Like there's several ways that applies to this journey. And I think, and not all physicians are the same. Everyone's going to have different skill sets, but whatever your skill set is, there's ways that shows up in the business that can really add a lot of value. And then the rest of the stuff that's not your passion or your zone of genius, as I've heard it called, you can ask for help, get help, learn enough about it to have an intelligent conversation about it, and to make some, decisions on those different topics, and then just keep going. And then as you get to grow, as you have, more and more support and funding, then you can really identify where those gaps are personally, hire for those, and then just keep that ball rolling. But I mean, I think the biggest thing that is always just such a pain in the butt and a gut check is fundraising. I mean, the very first round that I raised took me much longer than anticipated, and it's just really hard, to hear over and over again that your baby's ugly, and that's pretty much what people are saying, or that's what it
Oh,
feels like.
I didn't say that.
And so, I think that that's really difficult. But I do like to view it in a different way, which is to say that it really tests as a founder, it tests your commitment to the work that you're doing and to the cause that you're serving. And so, there's some utility in the process. And the guidance that was given to me is that you're going to have to pitch 100 times before you raise your round, no matter what size the round is. So just be ready for 100 times. And honestly, Like for my first round, that was probably pretty much the number. And so that's just a lot of time and a lot of talking and a lot of no's. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that there wasn't something there. So yeah, I love fundraising. If fundraising were my only job, I wouldn't mind it. But fundraising and running the company at the same time, that's a lot on anybody's plate. And so that's what I don't like about fundraising, is that it takes me out of the day-to-day of the business. And I don't like that.
Yeah, no, I understand. And funny enough, it's also not that different for us here at Health Walkers,
Yeah.
because we're is basically around every year. And yeah, I had to learn a lot over the years. And so no
Yeah.
answer is an answer. And the
Yeah,
answer is
exactly.
no. No answer
That's
is an
right.
answer, and it's no. Um, but because most of
Unfortunately.
the time you're struggling with, what are people not getting back to me? What's going
Yeah.
on? Why did they say that? Yes is a maybe. It just keeps going on like that. So until you know people really well and know what level of precision they use in their language when they say they're in or they may
Mm.
be in or whatever. So we spend a lot of time on that in the program, in the Health Lock Headers program. We do have a few questions here, so let me jump into them, because that's
Yeah.
I know you and I, we could just, if we
Just
don't pay
talk
attention, we
for
could
hours.
talk, and we'll both have a great time and learn a lot. But Lee Young uh, is writing here. I'm not sure that's a question, Lee, but how to unapologetically pursue entrepreneurship when we grew up in the environment where people assume we were born doctors and doctors only, including families. So including, I guess, dealing with your spouse and family. Is
Yeah.
that Lee, is that about right? And feel free to just unmute yourself or chime in on that. I guess that's a question. How do you defend that you're leaving healthcare? Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
the
mean,
so
my argument is that I never left healthcare. Even if I weren't still practicing as a laborist, I am still very squarely in healthcare, right? And the fact that I was a doctor and am a doctor, being a doctor to me is as core to my identity as being a woman, as being a mother, as being a wife. Like, it is part of me and will always be. And the fact that that is my sort of life path is what led me to do what I am doing today. Had I not chosen that as the beginning of my career, I would never be doing this as a career now. And so the two to me are not separate. They are on the same path. And one for me has led or evolved maybe even into the other. And I really feel very passionately that if we don't start to change the narrative in medical school and residency for our physicians who are in practice towards an obligation to innovation, like, we are going to continue as a group to lose this battle, to lose traction when it comes to evidence-based care of patients. And so I think we have a moral imperative to be involved in innovation. Otherwise, we can expect that the sort of lack of duty to patients that we're seeing amongst healthcare innovation now is going to continue to expand and expand and expand until what we have to say on the topic and on our duty to patients is no longer relevant. And I think we're at that, we're closer than I think we perceive as physicians to that sort of tipping point. And I think we have to be aggressive about sort of clawing back our role in the future of medicine. Because if we stand by as observers and onlookers, we will continue to be pushed out of the equation, and patients will suffer as a result of that. So I think that there is a long-term need for us to all be involved in this ecosystem, and we have to start to change the narrative, or else we're going to be in a worse position in 20 years than we are now, if we can imagine that at all. So I feel very unapologetic about it. And I think people who aren't involved should apologize, is how I feel, in case that wasn't clear.
okay, that's
Thank you so
great. Now,
much. Thank you.
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
that's I think was a similar question for me. Not going into my residency and kind of, what am I doing? My dad was a physician, my grandfather was a physician, and ultimately what I knew excited me was to help people and to be involved in their in reducing suffering. So I actually kind of distilled it down to what really is my motto is that what I get to do is to reduce human suffering. And however you can accomplish that, I think that is the core of the physician's calling. Whether you can cure it or at least reduce it, you're gonna do whatever you do in your arsenal to make that happen and give people a better life. Now, whether that is with your two hands, as is expected of you in medical school, or in any other facet, it's not a binary thing where if you happen to do it through the invention of a digital health device, that's going to undoubtedly touch thousands of people more than you ever could in your practice. That's the way I see it as well. And I know that by helping startups, I can have that accomplished at any level, and very likely much broader. And then also it's not that many that actually make the step that you did, Lyndsey, with Rosie. So it also brings up, if you are able to and you feel like you're in a position to do something about it, then, like you said earlier, it's almost like an obligation to do it, because there's plenty of physicians who might not be in a position to do it, or like Lee, like you mentioned in your comment, that might shy away from doing it because their families don't think highly of it. And I'm not really sure how my dad thought about it. Not 100% sure, but he was happy for me to do what I did. But it wasn't a slam dunk that was like the greatest thing ever. So
Yeah.
never know. So another question, Edith Lima Kariba, I think. So it's a hyphenated name. What was your experience working with product development experts? Tips on do's and don'ts.
Yeah, I think that the biggest tip here is to align incentives. And what that means is we don't want to come, if you are coming out of clinical practice or you have no technology background and you're coming and asking a technology team to do work for you, but you don't really know how to ask them. You don't really know the language in which to do it. It's kind of like someone trying to tell a surgeon the steps to perform a surgery, but they don't have any medical training or know anything about anatomy. Like, that's not probably going to be very successful, right? So you, as the non-technical person, have an idea of what you want built, and then the technical people have a much more practical sort of understanding of what that means. And what you have in your mind, or what you've discussed and defined, still is likely dramatically different than what is going on in their minds, right? And so there's this very big gap between non-technical founder understanding of technology sort of deliverables, and technical people and their understanding of a deliverable, and the nuances around it, right? So, like, for one example, whenever we first launched Rosie, went to market, first day, everyone had prepared me for, like, hey, it's probably going to be crickets. Like, this is just what happens when you launch something and you put it out into the world. Like, it's going to be okay if that's what happens. But we had downloads the first day. We made revenue the first day, but I had not ever one time considered the analytics around the platform, which now is just like laughable. But that day I was like, I don't know anything about what's going on. Like, how is that not part of what we had built? And everyone's just like, I don't, and I'm like, well, get to building it. Like, I was like crying. I'm like, what, how do we not, I can't tell anybody anything. I don't know what's going on. But that was my fault, really, because I didn't know that wasn't sort of part of the build, right? And I didn't know enough to know what I didn't know, or to ask for it to be added or whatever. So that's a small example that it was day one, and so it wasn't that big of a deal, but to me at the time it was a very big deal, and it was a blind spot for me. But what was good about the way that was set up was that this team was incentive aligned, meaning they were building for equity in the company, which is sometimes a hard thing to find. They weren't building for X number of dollars for these 5 things, right? Because if they were building for X number of dollars for these 5 things, and I had forgotten to tell them 10 things because I didn't know that I needed these other 10 things, then I was going to be, 3x on my development costs to get what I actually wanted out of the thing. And so I think, as much as you can, you just either want to bring someone technical alongside to co-found with you so that your incentives are aligned, or you want to find someone maybe who's not doesn't work as your co-founder, but who you can say, hey, I have all these awesome things. This is an amazing idea. I have an amazing network of physicians who I know will take it to market, blah, 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 blah. If you can sell them on that, then they may do for a mix of equity and cash or something like that, so that they are as concerned about the final product as you are. And there's not some discrepancy between what you thought was going to be built and what was actually built. It's pretty challenging. I now know, obviously, 5 years into this, way more than I did before, and can have like a very sort of educated, scoped conversation. But at the beginning, I had no idea.
Okay. Well, a second question from Edis is, what are some strategic tips for fundraising as a first-time founder, or is the economic climate good right now for that?
I'm not hearing that it's good. I'm hearing that it's bad. I'm not raising right this second, but I'm hearing, so here, you may know better than me on that question, but I'm not hearing good things. But I'm reading reports that things are improving. So maybe there's a little bit of lag between sort of what's happening macro and micro, and maybe we'll get there soon.
Well, I mean, did
But
it stop you from starting Rosie? Or, I mean, were you reading report to see is
oh
fundraising
no, I had no
good?
idea what was going on then. No, I had no idea. I am very stubborn, and I'm like very bullheaded. So if I'm going to do something, like I will get it done. Like and so that's always, and that's sometimes much to my detriment, right? Like that's not great, but that is always even I remember when I was an undergrad, my grandmother was like, she's very traditional, 8 children, Catholic family, like very woman type, stereotypical, like woman stays home and makes clothes. And she was like, well, what will you do if you don't get into medical school? And like, that was like, enraged me, like from my core. I was like on fire. I was like, I've never even thought about what if I don't get into medical school? Like, what are you talking about? So like, I didn't also entertain any thoughts of not being able to raise before I raised. I was very scared to do it, but I felt like I could. It was a long time though. So, but for fundraising as a first time founder, a couple of things. The first is, which we've already talked about, plan to pitch 100 times. The second is like start networking way before you're ready to start fundraising. So like, I remember I met Hubert for the first time at Dallas Startup Week, and it was I think it was maybe the spring of 2018. And I came to Dallas Startup Week. I was still in practice. Like I was non-clinical on Mondays. So I came that Monday and just tried to meet everyone I could. And this event is where I met Carrie Rupp, who ended up being our lead investor for our seed round, like literally like 2 or 3 years later. So there is nothing like network and personal relationships when it's time to start raising. And you do not want the first time that you're meeting someone to be when you're asking them for money. Right? You want to have known them for at least one other conversation. So if you can get down to Health Wildcatters, get to Dallas Startup Week, like start doing that way, way, way before your product is cooked, before you're ready to go to market. And then the other thing is that when someone says no to you, because most people will, then you ask them for 2 introductions to other people that might say yes. Because the walls can start to kind of close in on you as a founder, because it feels like everyone's saying no, and you're like, well, I'm going to run out of people to ask for money.
It's Michelle.
I don't know what
I'm on a call.
Oh, hey, Michelle. But if you keep asking for those introductions, then instead of your network kind of shrinking as you go through your list, it will continue to expand. And if you think about the world, obviously the world is like, I don't know how many billion people, 8 billion people at this point. So even if you get through 100 people, you're nowhere near the most people you could ever pitch. And so I think that, just keep asking, just keep pushing. And there will be days where you're like, I am so tired and sad and this isn't going to happen, but it does. You've just got to keep going,
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's great advice, and this is fantastic news. I had forgotten, so I have been trying to think, how can I take credit for Lyndsey Harper's? Now here we go.
There it is.
Panel
You did
that
it.
Carrie was up on it, because I know, pretty sure she was in a healthcare panel, and we've run the healthcare track every year, so I can now take full credit for this. This is phenomenal news. This, ladies and gentlemen, I have never had that a bit. Now, finally,
Thank you, Hubert.
she didn't go through our accelerators. So no, it's just all right. This is great. You just made my day. But you're spot on with with the no's, ask, possibly just say, hey, I know this is a no, but what could it, is there anything you can give me a hint why? Or and sometimes you're just not gonna, he's gonna get some squirming around, but sometimes you'll get an answer, and then would you be willing to introduce me to somebody you know, and continue to build your network. So that's, I think, great advice. Michelle asks, why hasn't someone created a book for healthcare startups like the Red Book? It is such a different beast. Are your lists and notes a start to a future publication? So are you writing a book? Did we hear it
Oh.
first here on this on this?
You know, this topic keeps coming up in my life, the topic of writing a book, but I think it sounds awful, you guys. I don't know. The problem for me is I'm so passionate about so many things. I'm so passionate about women's sexual health. I'm so passionate about women's health. I'm so passionate about physician entrepreneurship. Something's going to give at some point, but no, I'm too busy with this company right now, but I literally will never say never, and I have lots of thoughts. I think the challenge with a book on this topic, maybe I can write one for physicians specifically, but to write one for entrepreneurs broadly is so, I think it's just kind of like a lost cause, because there's just so many different pieces to that puzzle. You know what I mean? There's not necessarily a prescribed way to get through it or to do it. I do think that there are specific pieces to the healthcare puzzle that to this audience there may be some benefit. One of them is to really think critically about your go-to-market, which means like, how are people going to find out about you? And I think as physician entrepreneurs, we have very specific strengths in go-to-market strategy for our innovations. If we're willing to sort of think outside of the box and think about, especially if we're solving problems for physicians specifically. Our example is that, you know, I knew women's sexual health was not covered by insurance, and that physicians, if I go to physicians and ask them to buy it for their patients, they're never going to do that. But they would very gladly tell their patients about it, right? Because we would be saving them that time when they're about to, that doorknob question, right? When they're about to leave and the patient's like, oh, by the way. So I knew we could insert ourselves there and then potentially pass that cost on to the patient. And that's really how we went to market. And then we just basically told physicians, or asked physicians rather, to tell their patients about Rosie in that circumstance. And then we plugged in the things that I knew would be important to physicians: an evidence-based approach, which is obviously important to me as well. Publishing clinical research, not even RCTs, which we all know are so expensive, but publishing just even, you know, retrospective data as quickly as we possibly could, so that I could say, hey, this was built-in evidence. Here's our own original evidence. And we could just, you know, continue to thread that needle. We now have more than 12% of US OBGYNs referring Rosie to their patients, more than 6,500 doctors and therapists. We've served more than 250,000 women. And so that go-to-market is such a powerful unlock and differentiator for us as a women's health company, that I get more calls about that than any other strategy question, is how did you get so many physicians to support what you're doing? And us as physicians have a very unique window into that question that other people really, really wish they had.
Okay. Next question. What are the realistic expectations of time commitment to your spouse and kids as a physician entrepreneur? And Lee only wants the rosy aspects of this. So lie to us here.
I'm
Tell us it
confused by
can be
that
done in an
question.
hour a day, please. That's what Lee wants, and we're here to
I
please.
mean, so yeah, so I was a practicing OBGYN, and I think, especially with travel, because I travel all the time for this job, that I still work as many hours now as I did before. But there's two main differences. I say when I work, right? Like, I'm in control of my schedule, which for me I've learned I'm a huge control freak, is a huge deal. And that's important. And also, I still have sleepless nights because I am anxious about the business, but I am not up all night at the hospital. And that is, I mean, game changing from like a wellness perspective, right? So that's very important. And also, I used to like have Mondays off, and I would be like, who are you people? Like, what do you guys do for work? How are y'all out having lunch? And like, you know, like doing all these, and now
Yeah.
I can have lunch with a friend or with a business colleague or with anybody. Like, there's just so much more control, and that to me is really important. So I don't think that there's any delta in how much I work compared to being an OBGYN, but I think the control over how I work, where I work, when I work is better for me.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And anyone, if you think about the scheduling, then you will understand that's one of the major commitments for physicians. And it's very liberating to be able to do stuff.
It is.
So that's and then I see you can talk about entrepreneurs, physicians in entrepreneurship. Sometimes the conversation is around physicians who are burnt out and are looking for something else. And I
Right.
meet a lot of you, won't out anyone, nobody on this call. I'm just saying, I'm very often the beneficiary of the such referrals where I get to talk to someone who is just burned out and is wondering whether entrepreneurship may be an escape. So I'll say it here, that is not the way to reduce your workload.
Yeah.
It is a different kind of paranoia that will set in as a small business owner and startup
Big time.
entrepreneur. I do understand that it may be alluring. That would not be a good reason to become an entrepreneur. I would suggest other things if you need to just kind of chill and take that kind of
Decompress.
day-to-day stress out,
Yeah.
because you're gonna replace it with a different type of anxiety. Plus, there is a huge risk of failure in entrepreneurship, and we don't have the right people on this call to cover that aspect, but but it's just a reality. It's very real, it's very normal, and it happens. And so you just to know. Uh,
Yeah, I think on that topic though, if there is I do think that the creative aspect of being an entrepreneur keeps me from burning out as an entrepreneur. And so I do want to highlight that I wasn't able to identify that in practice. And I have been able to really identify that and really like feed that as an entrepreneur. So I do think in some ways I work as hard, but I'm less like angry about it because I can utilize some of these other skills and passions in a way that I didn't feel like I was able to at the time. But that also could just be a personal growth journey for me, So, but it allowed me to get there, I guess.
yeah, and I think we're coming to the wrap here. Before you guys jump off, I will say that the SOAP DFW has a LinkedIn group. And I know that Edith, you put your LinkedIn on here as well into the chat. So if anybody wants to connect with each other, feel free to drop your LinkedIns into the chat. But another way to do this, if you're a SOAP member or a DFW SOAP member, find the DFW SOAP group on LinkedIn, and it's not an open group. You can find hopefully a lot of like-minded people in that group. And Lyndsey just put her LinkedIn here as well. And I don't know if Lyndsey's on. Maybe Lyndsey can put mine in here as well. But I don't very often have this problem because if you put Hubert and Dallas in, there's only one. No, not many people were blessed with a name like Hubert. Usually it's the long lost great uncle that died a long, long time ago. And as a matter of fact, Lyndsey, to my embarrassment, the other day, somebody literally said that, and I started laughing. And then I caught myself, oh my God, this guy's just telling me about his great
Oh
uncle.
no.
And I start laughing. And I was so embarrassed because that is the story I tell people. I said, well, that name, nobody has it. My parents gave it to me. It's not even that regular in Austria, but usually it's a long lost, a long dead great uncle or such. So,
And it
so
was.
yeah,
That's
there's my.
yeah.
So no, I actually met somebody like that. On that day, I met two people who told me the exact same thing about a
Oh my
long
gosh.
ago deceased great uncle or granddad. So felt like a horrible person there for a minute.
But
But
now
we
we're back to the joke. We got the joke back already. So it was a
it's
short.
it's it's real now. So but in any case, yeah. So and Lyndsey put my and my last name doesn't help at all because there's a 1% chance that you can spell it right.
Yes. So you feel my
So,
pain.
yeah, so I'm with double Y Lyndsey. I think we're good here. So look up that LinkedIn group if you want to stay abreast of our meetings. The announcements to the LinkedIn group happen there. If you join SOAP nationally, please know that they have a Slack channel as well. And so there's ways to interact with other physician entrepreneurs or aspiring physician entrepreneurs on that Slack channel. It's an interesting community as well. And for those of you who, because I never explained what I do, don't know Health Wildcatters, we are a seed accelerator in Dallas. So we work with healthcare startups exclusively. SOPE is just a volunteer activity, and we have a meeting a quarter with an excellent speaker like Lyndsey Harper, usually a physician entrepreneur or a topic that is a good fit. So last word for you, Lyndsey, if there's anything else you wanted to leave the group with. We're at 6 o'clock. And
Yeah, well, if you're still practicing and you need sexual health resources for your patients, please go to Rosie. Our website is meetrosie.com. You can sign up to request patient materials, but we've also recently launched a new opportunity, Hubert, which I don't think we've had a chance to talk about, which physicians who take care of women can come directly to Rosie, the app. So you would, in this case, you would download Rosie in the App Store and create your own evidence-based medical content when it comes to the health of women. So we're really doing this in reaction to all of the misinformation, disinformation on social media, creating an evidence-based destination where patients can learn from you and also all of your other colleagues like physicians, pelvic floor PTs, mental health experts practicing in the field of women's health. So anyway, that's my little plug for Rosie. And I'm just inspired to be here with everybody. And I love this community. So thanks for the opportunity. And I would just encourage y'all to stick with it, whatever you're up to.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, as always. Very insightful. Several people have dropped their LinkedIn's in here, and Lyndsey also put Meet Rosie up. So there's the URL for your
Thanks, Lyndsey.
webpage as well. So with that, we're going to wrap it for today and yield the other 6 hours, the last remaining 6 hours of the day to all of you who are workaholics or work on a startup on the side. All the best to you, and we should expect our next meeting in the next quarter. So we have one each quarter, and they'll be again on Zoom. Meanwhile, all the best to all of you, and thank you, Lyndsey, for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.